The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So there's this very strange story out of a Bronxville, New York school, a private school, where a fifth grade teacher reportedly held a mock slave auction with white students at a private school. And the idea was that they were going to be bidding on their black classmates. I guess the idea was to teach them something about the history of slavery in the United States. And understandably, parents are outraged. The school has decided to place the teacher on administrative leave. This is Chapel School in Bronxville, New York. And they've brought in a third party to do an independent review. There are apologies. There are law firms involved. The representatives for the teacher are not saying that the slave auction was acceptable. They are saying that the slave auction simply never took place. They say, quote, "To the extent that anyone took offense to a small portion of the overall lesson that day that was used solely to emphasize the tragic injustice of slavery, it was never intended. She looks forward to continuing teaching with the same dedication, sensitivity, and passion that she has always shown." The Attorney General of New York says that the reports of racist lessons are deeply troubling and that the AG's office is monitoring the matter closely. What's interesting here, Pat, is that there's just a disagreement as to what took place. It's not a disagreement over whether it was reasonable to have white kids bid on black kids in a fake slave auction, 10 and 11-year-olds, mind you, fifth grade, but they're just not agreeing as to whether it even happened.
I feel like it probably happened because I don't see why people would make something like this up. And it's entirely possible that the teacher was doing this for good reasons. Like maybe her heart was in the right place. Maybe she wanted to get the students to sympathize with what slaves endured during the slave trade, kind of try to put themselves in the shoes of a slave. And I guess maybe some good could come out of that, but you don't want to split up the students into a white group and black group and do it that way. You'd want it to be random, like the auctioneers and the people bidding and the slaves should be of all different races, not split up like this.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, I think that's probably the right way to do it. I also agree with you that it's possible that the intent here was just to show how dehumanizing and horrible and tragic slavery is. But I find it hard to believe that, I mean, there are specific students who are saying, I was one of the people who was auctioned. Like people were bidding on me. Are they just lying? Is it
right?
That just seems extraordinarily unlikely. And there's a similar, so I don't remember where I heard this. I really don't know if I read this somewhere or whether it was at a school or an exercise that someone developed. I'm not sure. But the idea is that you split classes up into people who have brown eyes and then everybody else. And you then start to make sort of allowances or restrictions or privileges on the basis of who has brown eyes and who has other colored eyes. And it very quickly gets people thinking tribally. And it's sort of an analog to racial relations without actually dividing up the class into white and black kids. And that seems like it might be more appropriate for the lesson that was being taught here.
Yeah, it sounds in a way what you're describing like the Stanford prison experiment where a bunch of college kids in the 60s took part in a study and some of them were assigned to be prisoners, others were assigned to be guards. And over the course of hours, not even a week or so, like within the first couple of days, people really took on those roles. The prisoners felt like degraded prisoners. The guards became obsessed with power. And I feel like experiments like this can be effective in putting yourself in other people's positions, but you have to do so responsibly. It doesn't sound like this was done responsibly, and hopefully it doesn't happen again.
No, and the idea, if the idea is to show how people can be victimized or take on these positions of power, then you've got to split the class randomly, not white and black, even though I understand the historical reason for it. But the whole point, I think, is not to re-victimize the people that historically would have been victimized. It would be to show how it's arbitrary and anybody, regardless of skin color, can be victimized or seen as property rather than a person. I think that would have been a better way to do it. But what the hell do I know? I'm doing a show, not teaching. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, there's a new app called 63 Red Safe or 63RED. I don't know how it's pronounced. It's an app that is meant to keep conservatives safe, as they describe it, when they eat and shop. And the idea is that the app will tell you where will you be able to wear your red MAGA hat without being hassled, what restaurants can you eat at, what stores can you go to, or whatever. So this is number one. It runs counter to the idea that the left is easily triggered and are special snowflakes, which are really stupid terms, which we use satirically. But these are the types of allegations that the right makes about the left, that the left can't handle dissent or criticism or whatever. But from a merely practical perspective, Pat, how can the app guarantee you're not going to be hassled? Like, wouldn't it sort of depend on who happens to be in the restaurant at the time you're there, whether you're hassled for a MAGA hat, or maybe it refers merely to whether the staff has some kind of policy of hassling people with MAGA hats? I don't even get it.
There's a few different bullet points here, some different criteria. So one is whether or not the business will allow you to even go there, because you can discriminate in most places based on political views. Another is how the staff's going to treat you. And another criteria is if someone else in the establishment, like let's say you're at a restaurant and people at the table next to you don't like your MAGA hat, start talking to you, start talking smack to you. It depends on how the restaurant decides to deal with that situation. Like, will the restaurant kick those people out who are interrogating you? So a bunch of different things here. And there are a few other points too. Like, will you be able to bring your
really
gun to the
Pat,
business?
Is that of Exactly. The firearm question, which is, does the business allow customers to concealed carry, assuming that they are doing so in accordance with state laws, or are they so-called gun-free zones with posted signs or a policy that says no guns allowed? So listen, I almost want the app to avoid the places that meet the criteria. Like, I don't want to go to those places.
Yeah. And honestly, maybe because I'm just in my own little bubble here, but I've only seen one person ever wearing a MAGA hat just walking around the city. And in fact, now that I think of it, I think it was on an airplane, not even while Trump was president, but before, during his campaign. And I guess I'm lucky, I'm privileged in that sense, but I feel like down south you encounter many, many people with those ugly red hats on.
Oh, believe me, you are privileged, and we are all privileged living in Boston, which, by the way, there are conservatives in Boston, or in the suburbs anyway. There's a couple particular suburbs I drive through sometimes going to visit different people I know, where you see a lot of Trump stuff, but it's nothing compared to, like, when I was in rural northern Indiana a year or so ago. It was something else, and it was eye-opening, to say the least. A Jaguar is not going to be punished for attacking a woman whose selfie went horribly wrong. There's a Jaguar that attacked an Arizona woman who had passed a barrier to snap a selfie with the Jaguar. And the Jaguar grabbed the woman, and eventually it became a whole thing at Wildlife World Zoo, where some other patrons started to try to get the Jaguar to release the woman. The woman's in her 30s. Her arm was injured. I think this is the right decision, Pat. And I think that, number one, in general, it's often questionable to euthanize animals when they've attacked humans, because this is the nature of many wild animals. They are unpredictable, and they are wild animals. They are not socialized. But in this particular case, the person jumped a barrier. It's the fault of the barriers are there for a reason. The zoo recognizes people shouldn't be next to the Jaguar, and the woman jumped a barrier in order to take a picture. Why would you euthanize the Jaguar?
That's what I'm thinking. I don't even know what the argument is for euthanizing the Jaguar, because the woman jumped the fence. She admitted to jumping the fence. She admitted that it was wrong of her to do so. How can you blame the animal for that? It's not like it's a tame animal. Well, I mean, it's a wild animal that's been captured and now is on display, but it's not like it's supposed to interact with humans, certainly not just regular civilians who aren't trained to deal with it. I don't see what euthanizing the Jaguar would even solve, too. Maybe just adhere to our sentiment that it should experience some revenge for what it did, but I don't feel that way.
The only thing I could come up with, like if I'm trying to steelman the argument for the euthanizing of the Jaguar and make the strongest possible case, maybe you could say that after there has been such an incident that it is now dangerous to have that animal for the zoo staff, and that now it poses a risk once there has been an incident where it attacks a person, that it's just not safe for the staff of the zoo to even feed it. I mean, I don't even know. I'm just kind of making this up, but it doesn't even really feel like a strong argument, although it's probably the strongest I could make.
It would just make people feel safe, I think. People would be more willing to go to the zoo knowing that the zoo handled it in a so-called responsible way by euthanizing that evil jaguar. No, this is definitely the right decision. Don't euthanize the jaguar. And, you know, I don't even think the zoo should have to pay the medical bills of the victim. You know, she apparently has some injuries to her arm, and hopefully she makes a perfectly good recovery. But it was, I think, entirely her fault, honestly.
It is. It's just, I don't even know how you can argue anything else. Is a lawyer going to get involved and say the barrier should not have been one that it is even possible for her to jump? Like, could you make that argument legally? I don't know. We'll have to follow it.
Maybe we can get a lawyer to represent the jaguar in this case.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, that's funny, but it gets us to, you know, when people, that reminds me of when people talk about, if two men can get married, next thing you know, people will marry a horse. Like, really? Can the horse sign a contract? Is that something a horse is able to do? Okay, so a couple things. Number one, would you be interested in a video podcast feed of the full show and the bonus show? This is not something we currently have, but it's something that's often requested. Right now, the video of the bonus show and of the full show for members is available on YouTube and embedded on our website. Sometimes people say, I would love a RSS feed, a podcast feed for the videos that I could put on my phone. There would be an expense for doing that for us. But I'm talking to someone who thinks they'd be able to do it relatively inexpensively. So that's one question. Would you be interested in a podcast feed of the videos rather than just the audio? Let me know if you would. And number two, Pat and I are talking about possibly changing how we name episodes. We currently call them The David Pakman Show - full date with the month spelled out. And we've had a few suggestions from people that we put some of the topics in the title and then shorten The David Pakman Show March 13, 2019 to just David Pakman Show 3/14/19, which would give us some more space for topics. If that sounds interesting to you, if you care about that, let me know. If neither of those things sounds interesting, or one does and the other doesn't, also let me know so that we don't put time and money into changes that people don't really care about. Let me know. Farron Cousins guest hosting tomorrow. I'll be back on the Friday show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.